afternoon, everybody. This is apparently the most popular talk at Tent Super Talks, so we're very thrilled that you've all come. It's lovely to see so many of you in this incredible creative melting pot of the London Design Festival. I think this is the best show. Tent is extraordinary. My name is Marianne Shillingford. I'm the creative director of Dulux, and I brought with me an incredible creative talented team that are going to explain to you and bring to life our body of work called Colour Futures 2016. This is the 13th year of Colour Futures, which looks at trends in colour and interior design, global trends. It's something that we keep very secret, and it's the first time we've ever really talked to a creative community about it. So I'm hoping that you're going to really enjoy this. I'm sure you will. I'm going to introduce the people that are going to talk to you in more detail about what we've done upstairs. We've got Rebecca Williamson. She is the head of our colour, design and content. She's a senior colour and design and content manager at Dulux. She is responsible for creating the incredible colour ranges and colour collections. She also does the photography for our fantastic Let's Colour magazine, incredibly created. She's going to be very embarrassed in a minute. We are not worthy to be here with Rebecca. We've got Kit Miles, who is a rising star in design. I'm sure some of you have come across Kit Miles, hopefully all of you. He was our winner of the Young Designer of the Year at the Colour Awards last year, and his designs go from strength to strength. He really sets an incredible store in creating glamorous, gorgeous, hand-drawn fabrics and textiles, and yeah, he's one of my heroes in design. Zoe Murphy, she is a national treasure in design, as far as I'm concerned. The most beautiful smile and the most beautiful work upstairs. She champions the things that we love in our home and breathes new life into furniture with extraordinary design and colour. Absolutely fantastic. Anthony Roussel, you might know him for his incredible jewellery, started life as a jewellery designer, and then extended his work into a bigger picture and launched last year was Atelier at Tent, a new design brand which is exquisite, so please check out Anthony's work. And we have here Jessica Light, wonderful. She's brought it to life, a trend called dark and light, and I like the idea that your name just fits that perfectly. Yeah, she's got dark side, she does say, we'll know about that later on. Jessica is probably one of the last designers and weavers of trimmings in Britain. She's an extraordinary lady. I saw some of her work at Decorex, and I kept on walking past the stand. Absolutely extraordinary. So when you see what she's done with our trend in dark and light, you will be blown away. Fantastic. We're not worthy, Jessica, to be here. And here we have Mark McClure, who started life as a graphic designer and then went into fine art. And then with a combination of that he managed to blur the lines between design and fine art and come up with an extraordinary brand. And it's a distinctive geometric style and exquisitely executed, absolutely beautiful. And again, I keep walking past Mark's work and thinking, oh, I really like that. And then I'm like a tea bag really. I go, oh, I really like that work. Who's that? Oh, it's Mark. Oh, it's Mark. Anyway, so wonderful. Without further ado, I will not continue to rattle. I'm going to pass you over to Rebecca, and she's going to explain all about Colour Futures 2016. Thank you.
Thanks, Marianne. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm going to be covering off the kind of background and the story behind each of the Colour Futures 2016 trends, and then these guys are each going to tell you about how they've reimagined each of those themes. So, introducing Colour Futures 2016. So we've already covered off the team behind this year's show at Tent, but I don't know how many of you are aware of the way in which we forecast at Dulux and at Akzo Nobel, but we've actually been doing trend research, well, longer than 13 years, as it says here, but we've actually been publishing it in a kind of book annual forecast for the past 13 years, and some of you may have seen this over the years. And there's a huge kind of wealth and rigor that goes into the process that we use to forecast. So looking at the kind of behind the scenes of that. So we work actually with a number of external experts within fields of design. So anything from beauty, architecture, many, many facets of design to get a kind of overarching view of what's happening, not just on a cultural level, what's happening in the economy, to get a real feel for the main kind of cultural movements that are happening at a very global level. So we look across the globe to kind of identify that. That's then distilled down and worked with internal colour experts. So we have colour experts in the UK as part of my team. We also have colour experts from China, from Brazil, and they all come together to actually create a kind of conversation that happens over a number of weeks with this external group. So they're known as the analog group. And then with the internal experts, they actually have a number of workshops and debates around what's really resonating, what's really kind of that sticking point in design, what's really going to make it and have longevity. So that's distilled down. We then create, off the back of that, Colour Futures publication. And that's how the book comes to life. So looking at what's behind that, so the output of all those discussions, those very rigorous discussions, then comes across as one dominant theme that connects all of the ideas together. That's then distilled down into 4 trend ideas, and that's a slight change on last year for those of you that are familiar with how we've done our forecasting in the past. We've actually made it more single-minded. We feel like actually giving less choice in terms of colour makes it more focused and more directional. And the difference going into 2016 is that this year we've really kind of cemented the colour of the year, which really kind of overarches all of the themes. And actually providing a palette to support the colour of the year, demonstrating how our customers, our consumers can actually use that colour in their homes and in their commercial design. So that looks like this. So we've got the overarching idea, which is looking both ways. We've got the colour of the year, which is cherished gold. And then we've got the 4 trends that we'll go into in more detail in a second. And then against each of those territories, so the reason that we're actually here at Tent this week, we actually, for the first time, decided to collaborate with these fantastic surface designers who have each completely reimagined our kind of trend forecast and what we are predicting, but they've put their own spin on it, they've given it their interpretation, they've used their own unique style to really bring that to life, and hopefully you'll see the results later and be as wowed as we were. So just going back into the overarching trends, so looking both ways, all of the kind of panel discussions that were happening, every time someone came to the table with an idea, there was always a kind of counter trend happening to that one idea. So we're in this time of kind of duality. We've got this kind of crossroads situation where kind of differing opinions and views has kind of never been so important. So this kind of cements all of the themes that you'll see here today. And then moving into why cherish gold. So I'm sure you're all aware, as fellow designers, that gold and gold tones have just been across every facet of design, whether that's, you know, in a bold way in architecture, whether that's through subtle use of design and touches here and there. It's touched every area of design, graphic design, and it just really kind of cemented all of the kind of themes that we were looking at. Also, because we had quite a big conversation about what is luxury, and gold being that kind of optimum, but actually looking at other materials, so things like wood, also now having that kind of luxury feel, and that actually influenced the direction of the colour. So it's not not maybe the colour that you would expect when we say gold. It's definitely an ochre gold, and it has that really lovely kind of wooden, earthy feel to it. It's quite a humble shade. It's not ostentatious. It has that lovely subtlety, and you'll see some of the amazing combinations that you can pair it with. So here, for the first time, we've got the colour palette to accompany the colour of the year. And you'll notice it's complemented by those lovely humble shades. So anything from that rich tan, that deep bitter chocolate for a kind of more tonally neutral combination, but also that lovely kind of duck egg territory and that soft blush. And hopefully if you come back into tent after the talk, you'll see this everywhere in our area, and you'll see how it takes on many different characters depending on where it is within the space, which colours it's teamed with. It has many characters, and it's very, very versatile. So these are some of the kind of ways in which we've visualized it within an interior setting. So very much on the kind of teaming it with the cooler side of the palette, so the duck eggs, and coordinating it with accessories that have a very industrial feel to give it a slightly more masculine look. And then on the kind of flip side, teaming it with that lovely soft kind of rose-tinted blush that just gives it a kind of feminine effect and really softens the tone of the colour. And over to Kit to explain how he's reimagined it.
Okay. Is this on? Oh, hello. Well, first of all, it was delightful to be invited on board. My training is in textiles, and fundamentally that is an investigation into colour. In my practice, I use colour to pull the viewer's eye through a design, and hopefully in doing so, convey narrative and tell a story. And that was really how I came to this project. My studio is also steeped in the values of looking to the future, but also with a very strong heritage element. And I wanted to create something that felt extremely dynamic. It does look both ways in that respect. So I amended and redesigned one of my more recognizable prints called Diagonal Gradient using these wonderful colors. And it was a great design challenge because, again, there are those very soft colors, as you mentioned, and my studio is very much recognizable for its strength and power. So the challenge was how to bring that in using these lovely soft tones. So, you know, we've got the hard edges with the very soft sort of pinks and blues. And when you see it in the space, when you come upstairs, I hope that you'll agree a very dynamic flooring installation, which you'll see in a moment, has been rendered on the floor. This was part of Somerset House Colour Futures and was a prelude to this event, actually. Yes, and this is another one of my designs. So yes, I mean, talking about looking both ways, this one's very much, or this design style within my studio is very much about the classical meeting the futuristic. And here we are upstairs at Tent. So I just wanted to create something that felt like you were rushing into the future, like you were sort of striding atop a sort of galactic plane, rushing you to tomorrow. And it really does create an interesting effect in the space. It pulls it, and also you're forced to look not only as the space as a whole, but you zoom into the kind of macro as well, which is wonderful. It's been a great opportunity to work on a spatial level. And that's it for now. Thank you.
So moving into the 4 trend territories. So as I mentioned, they have this duality within each. So heritage and future, words and pictures, dark and light, and the grid and letting go. So we'll kick off with heritage and future. So this idea very much cemented around conversations between the panel, thinking about the fact that you can't really design for the future unless you understand the past, and the fact that globally we are seeing businesses and brands opening up their archives to cement the kind of credibility of what they have produced in the past, and then showcasing that alongside their kind of innovative design for the future to really kind of build authenticity and credibility for their brands. Also showcasing, so Moy here, you know, furniture and new product against a very classic period backdrop. So a complete kind of contrast and juxtaposition of time, but enabling them to showcase their product in a completely new way. And even through architecture, I mean, the British Museum, for example, that really lovely blend of new and old, which in theory shouldn't really work, but it actually just takes on a completely new and dynamic space. So the colour palette here, very much taking influence from rich tapestries of the past, traditional dyeing techniques, and it has a real kind of red focus. You'll see the kind of cooler and warmer reds coming through, which are really reflective of that time, but also grounded with those lovely kind of rich, sumptuous neutrals to kind of balance the palette. And the way we've kind of visualized that in the home, we actually used a period property here, but our thinking, especially within the trend itself, is that this should work equally well when paired in a new build property, but with those touches of accessories and furniture that maybe have a more historic feel. So here, very much focusing on the kind of redder edge, but making sure there's lots of touches of real metallic to kind of offset it. And then on the kind of flip side, so focusing on the neutrals, taking influence from the parquet flooring, for example, and picking up those really lovely, rich tones, and keeping it quite single-minded on the walls, so quite simple, but still effective. Yeah, over to Anthony.
Hi there. Well, my studio mostly works with wood, and I try to use a colour palette that will complement the dark tones. This is a piece of mine that's using walnut. So when Dulux approached me with specific colours for the heritage and future trend, I thought that was really up my street. And we got a picture of what here we go, here's another piece. What I try to do with my work is layer them in a way to exaggerate and accentuate shadow in combination with colour, which can be quite difficult sometimes. It's a lot easier when you're working with shadow for everything to be one tone or super white. I try to work with colour in combination. And here's another piece where you can see that I'm trying to push what shadow can do. And although my work is sculptural, I try to use flat elements and kind of almost dupe someone into seeing the sculptural effects just by kind of Lego pieces almost put together. Okay, so for my interpretation of this trend, I looked at a very traditional technique called ikat, which is a weaving textiles process where the pieces, the yarn is dyed before the actual weaving takes place. And I was drawn to the linear quality that is found within ikat. But how I wanted to interpret it in a future way was to actually bring it out into 3D layers. Now, if you look at ikat, it is a sculptural piece if you look up very close, but this is completely accentuated. And I wanted to reference the different linear patterns that are found too. And I think that in combination with the shadow that I tried to accentuate, I feel I've been able to celebrate something traditional, but not be afraid of pushing it into the contemporary and making it a modern piece that works. Okay.
Okay, so thank you, Anthony. So moving on to our second trend, so words and pictures, which very much centres around the kind of visual saturation of imagery that there is, particularly within the digital world, and how important imagery is to us, but how maybe the believability in imagery has kind of lessened as we know that people can kind of manipulate and change things to kind of suit. There's actually a lot of technology out there, which I'm sure you're aware of, that almost enables you within this kind of craze to actually capture imagery without even, knowing so. So this Momoto example, I think they take a photo every minute, so it just clips onto your clothes, and you're literally kind of documenting your life live, but you're not even aware that you're doing so. So that's the kind of one side. And then on the flip side, because of the kind of visual saturation, there's this kind of tradition going back to storytelling, particularly within the kind of Chinese market, and really kind of celebrating words and going back to, traditional poetry readings and community gatherings. And this is also coming through, which I know everyone will be aware of. Everything has this kind of strong call to action, and as within social media, everything is very instant. Everything needs to be kind of quick and told very quickly. So the strength of action within words is really, really coming through. And this is also having an effect on kind of architectural development. So the kind of humble library being reimagined and being very kind of single-minded in the design to overemphasize, what's behind those doors. So the palette here has this kind of wonderful subtlety. It takes on the kind of traditional writing with the kind of deep, rich, inky blue and that graphite grey, but also layered with those beautiful pastels. And they're pastels, obviously, we've seen over the last few years have kind of gathered in momentum, but these have a kind of more degraded quality. They're less kind of sweet and sugary, and they're very much influenced by the filters you'll be familiar with on platforms like Instagram. So how we've kind of brought this to life, I think because technology is now such a kind of massive part of everyone's lives, it's taken on a more human feel. So the location that we chose to shoot this in, we wanted something really tactile, very textured, and so that kind of raw brick feel adds that human touch, but also touches of life with lots of kind of plants and lots of soft textiles to kind of soften that kind of industrial space. And also, I mean, lettering isn't a new thing, but I suppose it's being used in a kind of more oversized, overemphasized way. So really kind of, going strong with that giant Z to say, this is what this room is about. Over to Zoe.
And that's me. Hello, I'm Zoe Murphy, and I am a textile designer, and I use my textile designs to screen print onto second-hand furniture pieces, and I've been doing that for about 8 years now. And as you can see, my colour palette is far removed from the words and pictures trend, which is really kind of knocked back and muted. So when I was approached by Dulux to come along and do an interpretation of the trend and saw the colours, I thought, oh my goodness, okay, this is going to be a challenge. But actually, I've really enjoyed doing it, thank you very much, because it's allowed me actually to focus much more on the concept and the themes and also the kind of patterns and imagery that might be employed in that sort of interpretation. And I've really enjoyed that. So when I was given the trend to work with, I went entirely personal with it. I've just realised in listening to you talk about it that actually I didn't think too hard about commercially what's happening in the world of words and pictures. I got really kind of reflective and internal about it, which I think is quite a good thing in terms of the looking both ways and the overarching theme that's happening this year with Colour Futures. And for me, personally, the way that I and most of my peers and the people that I aspire to be like and follow, quite literally, not literally in my life, follow around, but the people that I follow on things like social media and the people that I allow to make an impression on me, the most that I will see words and pictures in the same space is actually in this kind of really joked about, kind of mocked, inspirational quote trend that is massively on the increase. And it's a bit of an embarrassing thing that people kind of don't, you don't want to post one of these on your Facebook page or things like that because everyone's going to go, oh God, what's wrong with her? And And so I try not to, actually, but I see stuff like this all the time. And for me, personally, I think it's this kind of increase in popularity of this sort of emotional medication for yourself is correlating really strongly with the kind of increase in importance of things like mindfulness that people are finding in their lives. I think it seems to me something really contemporary about people wanting to seek their own spirituality these days, not necessarily always looking for definition or help or hope in things like religion. It's also kind of turning to other people or to the really human side of yourself and looking at your past to kind of have some sort of momentum towards your future. And I really loved that as a theme and about something that I could get really kind of academic about. I really enjoyed the idea of looking at that kind of self-help and self-hope that I think more of us than we would admit actually use in our everyday lives. And so in looking at a lot of kind of inspirational quotes on things like social media and pairing that with all of the kind of filter colours that were coming in from the trend forecast, and I wanted to create a little space in my kind of trend interpretation that was all about almost being inside an inspirational quote, and in a way kind of importantly having ownership of it, and it being something that you don't want to feel embarrassed about, and something that you can actually, everyone can kind of have a think about and maybe identify that it's a really valuable thing to wish to make ourselves better, and to find hope in images and in pictures and words together, and find humour in them, something that you can be a lot more human about by using words and pictures as a trend. So this little scape I wanted to put together, I trawled through and looked at loads of my favourite ones, and there was always this notion of a like really vague quote that was ethereal enough for everyone to be able to find something that they could relate to in it. And also, it's often that kind of really back to basics sort of scenic landscape that you see behind it. All the ones that I kind of secretly pin on my quote board on Pinterest that no one can find because it's super secret, and look at it every day. And there was always some kind of like mountain background or the sea, and coming from the seaside, I can really relate to that as well. So those kind of environments where you feel really connected again to something really, really basic, going back to your roots and finding something that makes you feel really real again and gets you away from technology, but ironically that you're looking at it through a screen. You're probably looking at it through a filter of some sort of gradient of colour and some words and a quote in front of it. And so we're using our technology to kind of reconnect with really human elements about ourselves. So again, that was my interpretation for words and pictures. So I put together a little, in our trend booth, I've put together a way of looking at a really scenic landscape that I had the chance to design and screen print and hand paint onto big boards that we installed, and observing all of that hopefully very pretty and calming landscape through some of these filters and through the filter of a quote and words as well. And even when, as a team with Dulux, we were looking at different quotes, I almost vouched for something that said something like, "This is how I feel." I felt really strongly about having a quote that represented the pride that you can feel about using words and pictures to be a human and to really connect with yourself again and look at your past and understand it in order to move forward. It can be for really happy reasons as well. It doesn't always have to be getting over something. But instead we went for this one that actually I think does connect a lot better to the overarching theme of the colour of the year, which is how how much more powerful words and the use of imagery and words have become in changing the way that we look at things. And that kind of retrospective in order to progress theme of using the duality of those things in order to improve your life and improve your surroundings. So I hope in some way that's explained my really intensive interpretation of words and pictures and how I wanted to create a space that represents everything that I feel about that theme, using the palette and also using typography and things like that. Yeah.
Thank you, Zoe. So moving on to our third trend, so dark and light. So very much about embracing the night and embracing our kind of dark side, which I know puts a lot of fear into us Brits. We're used to light and airy, and that's the way we want to live. But this takes on a completely different kind of effect, and I hope you like the results. So very much centered around the fact that light and light pollution is at the kind of forefront of our minds, and the fact that that's having a massive impact on us individually, but also on our kind of natural environment, with the introduction of things like Earth Hour. So actually, you know, kind of getting everyone to rally around and really think about our, you know, our consumption within kind of light, and thinking about going back to basics, and, you know, that lovely essence that you get when you just have a few candles lit at home. I think it really kind of encapsulates the lovely nature of this trend, and how we can think a bit differently. Also taking influence from the kind of old masters, so the way in which Rembrandt would utilize such a deep, sumptuous palette, but offset it with that lovely kind of ochre gold, to kind of really highlight detail and interesting elements within his paintings. It's also having a big effect on how we're looking at building, and how people operate within, you know, their offices, for example. So this is an example of a idea around having a natural light source. So actually it emulates the sky, so you feel like you're working in a kind of open plan environment. So light's still very important, but more on the natural side, and how that could increase potentially productivity as a result. So the trend here, which we actually promoted, you may have already seen some of this coming through, and we actually promoted as our autumn-winter trend for this year, takes on that really highly rich, saturated palette, and very much encourages you to use it tone on tone, but offset with that lovely, rich ochre that has a kind of reflection of the golden hour type light, as well as that lovely pale silvery grey that just lifts the space. And that's showcased here. So obviously this space, for example, we've gone quite intense on all of the walls, the ceiling, even the flooring is very dark, but that's offset by the furniture, the fabrics that reflect the light, lots of texture to offset the kind of depth. And here, this is a really lovely translation. And for those of you that joined us at Somerset House last week, I think this was one of the favourite room sets that we brought to life. But that beautiful colour fade that kind of reflects the dawn till dusk light transition. Still a lot of that coming through, and I think you'll agree there's loads of it still around the show today. But it has that sumptuous quality. It's interesting, I think we often get asked as a brand, you know, how and where should we use deep colours? People want to kind of experiment with them, but they're not sure where or why. And I think for us, it's about making a decision based on the mood that you want from that space. So it could translate into any room. If you want something really rich and sumptuous and calming, it won't close in the space. It will just create something much moodier in comparison to obviously a very light, bright and kind of refreshing space. Over to Jessica.
I'm Jessica, and I am one of the last passementerie weavers left in this country. And one of the things that I try and do is to bring a very sort of traditional craft into the future, i.e. in that I play a lot with scale and a lot with colour, and my work is very design-led and contemporary. When I got this trend, I absolutely love it because I love the dark. I've always loved the dark. Even as a child, I had to have the light off and the door shut. I find the dark a place that, you know, there's something about it that's safe, it's comfortable, it's somewhere you go and hibernate, it's somewhere where you can hide from, you know, the world outside, which is quite a scary place. I also really love the idea, and I'm really fascinated in the way that dark changes colour. You know, when we talk about colour, when everyone says, oh, it's so nice you're using a bit of colour, it's like what they mean is bright colours, but actually you know, you have, when you turn that light off, the amount of colours that you can see are just extraordinary. And they start changing your perceptions of things. You know, when you are in the dark, you see shadows, you see, well, some people see ghosts, I never have. And I love that. I love that idea of sort of thing, of the way that light and dark changes colour. So what I wanted to do for, oh, that's some stuff from my new collection. What I wanted to do for this particular trend was to kind of show that idea of sort of light going into dark. As you can see, I sort of used dip dye in order to kind of create that sort of slow colour change as things get darker and darker. Also with the sort of top bit, again, I've gone very dark up into light. And I've created this, almost like a nightscape. I wanted to sort of get that feeling of that sort of coziness that you get from the dark. When we think of dark and light, you know, we think of light as good and dark as evil. You know, people talk about black magic being bad and white magic being good. And we talk about sort of the dark recesses of our minds and how it's sort of actually seen as a bad thing. But you know what? It's not. And there are more and more spaces being created that have a much darker sort of atmosphere in interiors, because actually they are very warm and they are very comforting, almost kind of room-like in a way. And I was very fascinated by all of that. That's what I wanted to create with this, was to kind of give a feeling of richness in colour, but in dark colour.
Thank you. So our fourth and final trend, in stark contrast to what we've just seen, is the grid and letting go. So a lot of the discussions that the panel had around the idea of actually, to be able to kind of have fun and have freedom, we need to have kind of structure within our lives. And I think a lot of people are feeling that. A lot of people are feeling that things are very rigid at the moment, and I've got, you know, only a limited amount of time on my hands. I've got to plan in advance. I've got friends, I've got family to see. But they're looking for this kind of breaking the mold piece of kind of, whether that's entertainment, experiences, and the team actually spent a lot of time at the Milan Furniture Fair. Holly, sorry, can you? So looking at Mazzoni, I'm sure some of you experienced this, where they'd created this wonderful kind of amazing installation where people could just rest and stay and observe this wonderful landscape, almost kind of Alice in Wonderland inspired design that just took people away for 5 minutes and just thought about something that was just a real visual feast. Also, kind of key examples around the kind of circus inspiration, inspiring design. So that kind of exciting and vivid colour, but captured in a way that has this lovely playfulness. They also talked about the fact, I think there's a craze in New York at the moment where people are going raving before work. So before they've even got to the office, they've gone and had a dance, and that's their like workout for the day. So quite different and a new way of kind of getting energy for the day. But also looking at, you know, they were looking at a lot of the kind of new design talents. So the kind of juxtaposition of simple design, but with this kind of very playful nature, like Wrong for Hay. So having this slightly kind of a spin-off of a kind of traditional design. But as I said, this kind of desire for something different and breaking the mold, you can't do that unless there's this kind of grid to follow, and that's why it has that kind of contrast. You can't break the rules if there aren't any rules to break. So, unsurprisingly, the palette here is probably on the brighter edge of what you've seen today. So still kind of not primary, so corals rather than oranges. But it has that lovely energy. It has that real kind of freshness and playful nature. And you'll see in the way that we visualized it, it takes on a completely different appeal once it's teamed with those kind of more grid-like influence colours like the off-white and that really rich, almost black charcoal. So looking at some of the interpretation here, so this is the one that has all the fun effects. So very much taking on the kind of geometric idea, but with that kind of dry brush technique, so it's not a solid shape. And then it's interrupted by that lovely disc of gold just to offset it and kind of interrupt the grid. And then here, I mean, a quite literal grid format, and I'm sure you're aware that grid pattern is everywhere, even looking across all of the design shows this week. It's come through so strongly again, but a kind of new take on, you know, applying it to a larger surface, upscaled, and teaming those lovely brights with plenty of that off-white to kind of balance the space and create pockets of interest. Mark.
Hi there, thanks for having me, and thanks to Dulux for giving me this brief, really. I mean, it's a dream project to work on from my point of view. I'm a graphic designer, so I've been brought up and trained and had grids piled into me since college, lining up your layout pages and your typography. So it's great to sort of show you how I apply these grids to a lot of my work, and these are some murals that I've done over in East London, and you can see how the grid holds things together, but then it's a case of breaking it and going against it and pushing things a little bit into a different direction. This is a wall panel which, part of research for some flooring, which you can see examples of upstairs if you come up. And again, it's the idea of really pulling against the sort of forced grid that we often work to and breaking it, but still to the point where things hold their own and hold together just about through composition and playing with the depth and the shadows, a bit like Anthony using the depth of layering to build up and add an extra element to things. And as has been said, I've also touched on fine art, so it's a case of mixing the two. I find it a really interesting line to tread between graphic design, applied design, and fine art. I think it's a grid that I want to try and break away from, these pigeonholes that everyone's often pushed towards. And it's all about context for me. And if, again, here it's a 3D space, and it's not a work of art, and it's not a piece of design. It's a bit of both. So it's been great to have that chance to fill this area with something that is just showing off some beautiful colours. And they're colours, to be honest, colours that I wouldn't necessarily immediately pick. So I've broken my own grid in some ways by using these pastel shades and some of these really bright colours that aren't always the ones they're not the ones I'd have gone for, to be perfectly honest. It's been a challenge, it's been great fun. And I've tried to explore, if you catch it front on, you can see that it lines up, and the idea of breaking away from this grid that holds it all together, adding a playful element, which I think we all look for, and adds an extra element of interest. And if you turn to one side, it breaks away from the grid again and gives a different composition, so everyone sees things from different angles. And I think it's very current. I think everyone in the climate today is looking to get away from behind the desk and the DIY culture and the escaping from CCTV and all this stuff we've got on Channel 4 at the moment. It's the Hunted series. So I think it's deep down in everyone. They want to get away from the routine and the humdrum. So it's definitely very topical at the moment.
Thank you. I think hand over to Marianne.
Mistress of Ceremonies. If we've got time, we would love to invite you to ask our panel questions. So we are all the design family here. We are all related in some way together, so please don't be scared. Pop your hand up and somebody will come and bring a microphone. So just while they're here, take advantage of having them here and ask them any questions that you have in mind. Come on, be brave, somebody. Oh, here we are. Wonderful. There. Catch her quick before she changes her mind. just there, the beautiful red hair.
I was wondering if you could go back to the world and pictures sort of trend, if that's okay. I was just wondering, you know, you spoke about these kind of life quotes and mottos. I was just wondering if you think, in terms of the general public, whether or not people are starting to tire slightly of, you know, the slogans, we're seeing them on cushions, ceramics, cards, kind of telling people to love life and laugh loud. And I was just wondering how you think that trend sort of, yeah, I don't know.
Is this, yeah, okay, good. Yeah, really sick of that. I kind of recoil when I see like vinyls on a wall and it's like, relax. And you do almost, I mean, the defiant person in me is like, no, I'm not going to. And again, it's kind of like breaking the grid and things like that. But I think in a way that kind of overuse of anything not only indicates its popularity, it also can kind of like make people numb to it and stuff like that, and it genuinely is, like, maybe this wasn't the arena for me to explore it, but it genuinely is an area that I'm fascinated with at the moment, because I still feel that people having ownership over their emotions and kind of being proud of them and being proud of their own approach to looking after yourself is something that's really, really valuable, and things like that are making it slightly unpopular to look to literature for inspiration. It's kind of like, you feel silly now if you turn to your friend and say, well, a wise man once said, blah, 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 blah. But actually, it's like sharing that kind of wisdom is a really, really human thing. And in a way, I like this trend for I'm almost attempting to kind of make it sophisticated again and reclaim that sort of banality that's gone on a little bit, and the words and pictures with that investigation into like really traditional storytelling, you know, it not being a commercial thing, like quite literally people verbalizing and doing it on a really personal level. I still think there's a big difference between the two, and yeah, so people doing it for themselves and kind of feeling proud enough to do that personally is fine and is a good thing. And the way that companies might be using that to sell products, that's something that's probably always going to happen as well. So does that kind of answer the question? Have I got anywhere near it? Yeah, a little bit.
Is there anybody else? Anybody else? Right, anybody down here? Chickens.
Hello. This is probably tailored more towards Rebecca. So you spoke about the 4 trends. Mm-hmm. Why did you decide on 4? Why was that the magic number? Why not 6? Why not 2? Why not 8?
It's a good question. I think we started with 5, so we've always had 5 in previous years. And what we found was people seem to remember 4 better than 5. It sounds very simple, but actually, even to a degree, we've cut down the number of colours that we put within the palettes, because again, as soon as you give kind of too much choice and too many ideas, I think we wanted to make it a bit more direct and single-minded, and 4 seemed to stick. I think, to be honest, it naturally formed, 4 themes as well. So that often comes out of the conversation, is which are the areas that feel like they're strong territories and they've got longevity. So that's how they kind of. But to be honest, it's a forever moving feast. So it may change again next year.
Anybody else?
Hi. Yeah, outside of things like interiors, how do you see these colours filtering through into the wider creative world, or just in general? Everyone.
Okay.
Film, music. In fact, we were talking earlier, weren't we, about how I hear the colour before I execute it in the design.
See, I've never had that, but now I see colour as almost music to me. It's if you're creating it's like putting on a record on to match a mood, isn't it? You walk into a room and you have the right music, but I think it definitely filters through, comes through everything. Yeah, definitely.
I think it could also be a question about how technology enables us to play with surfaces and add colour to them. I mean, if this room was sprayed with like video-enabled sort of film or something, then the designer would be, okay, we have this great opportunity to put motif and colour throughout this environment in a new way. So technology offers a new horizon, a new glimpse into how colour can be applied. But I think people should just be really brave and really use colour in their lives. You know, thinking for yourself is increasingly, you know, important in sometimes can be a homogenous world. So I think the emphasis is to think for yourself and to explore the grey. I think going back to your point about people needing these very definite slogans to define whatever, I think it's just a great opportunity at the moment to, explore the greys, think for yourself.
And I've always found with Dulux and the work that you guys do in terms of investigating what's going on in the world, culturally, scientifically, everything, they're represented often in a way through the work that you do in palettes for walls and things like that. But actually, it's in essence just colours of everything that we see, and that's where the inspiration comes from. And I think it's entirely expected to be carried out in every different format as well. So anything that humans are interacting with that is to be a colour, which is everything, isn't it? It's anticipated that these things are going to come through in every surface. And Dulux work with colour palettes for walls and for interiors and things like that, but the research is done so broadly because it's expected to be carried out broadly as well.
Isn't the new iPhone sort of cherished gold as well?
Yes, well,
It's
yeah.
all kind of gold. They've become technology, is now as an accessory, isn't it? Yeah.
Hello. I was just wondering, do you find that most of your colour trends come from fashion, or is that quite a lot of inspiration for you? How does that work?
I think what we were just talking about in terms of it's broader than fashion, but fashion is one of the facets that we will take into consideration. And I think often interiors obviously follows fashion. So when we're looking at palettes, it's a great point of reference. And also, it often changes quicker in fashion, so you get a sense for what's going to kind of stick around and stay and make it, when we come to visualising it in the home, it's, you know, it's got longevity and it's going to stick around.
I'm interested in what you kind of glean from these initial meetings with the panels of experts. What kind of questions get asked? You said that you get people from beauty and architecture. I mean, what are those initial discussions like?
So I'll be completely honest, I'm not in that panel, so I'm not a complete fly on the wall, but from what's described, it's quite a hotly debated situation, but it's interesting because they are coming from completely different backgrounds. It seems that the crossover within different industries is really evident, and they kind of talk around, you know, they all come prepared with their own research. They research every day of the year to make sure that they've got a kind of really well-rounded view of what's happening within their areas. And then they challenge each other to say, which of these themes, you know, cross-pollinating, you know, which one is going to really stick and which is translatable to that audience.
I'm just interested in the kind of the overriding trend of duality, because almost you kind of talked about there's a counter trend for every trend, so almost that's a kind of never-ending circle in the sense that how do you pick a trend if there's always a counter trend to the trend you're talking about? So I suppose, because I'm from retail, so it'd be quite interesting from your kind of customer's point of view, how are you seeing that they're kind of what they're buying from a colour point of view now is so proliferated that there are no trends in kind of what they're buying, or are you still really seeing that people are buying into trends despite this kind of feeling of duality that goes on now in the trend world?
I think people are buying into trends. I think they want reassurance that it's not something that's going to change, particularly within paint, that it's not going to change tomorrow, and that they can work with colours that, even if they're updating an aspect of the palette, it's not a complete overhaul every time, because people feel like it's a real investment of their time and they want to get it right. We definitely see patterns within the colours that people are buying. Obviously, as a nation, we do love a neutral. We do love a neutral. But, you know, the influence of grey, for example, I mean, everywhere. And I think the combinations of then what people work within, not just their walls, but how they treat their furniture, how they treat their fabrics, that has that kind of interchangeable nature, I think.
When do you announce your colour of the year?
We announced it last week. So it's pretty hot off the press, actually. It's gaining momentum, so it is hopefully going to reach the masses. But we tend to do a kind of softer launch around this time of year, and then obviously so that it's timely to then talk about in 2016 when it's going to be most relevant. But I think everyone here knows that gold is already coming through it really strongly.
Thanks. Do you find there are several contenders with the colour of the year? Is it quite blatant to the team?
They normally get settled on a territory very quickly, and then it is literally a case of trying lots of different variations on that tone to get the exact right area. So there were many different kind of ochre, gold inspired territories, and then really hitting on one and making sure that that combines perfectly with those palettes.
I've got a point to add, if that's okay. With trends, it's really interesting to hear about how you accumulate all of this kind of data from around the world and how you can create a sort of understandable story for people to really run with. I think it's really important to be inspired by that and then go to all the museums in London, for example. I mean, we've got the most amazing series of museums in this one city, and it is a global city. So I suppose it's enabling you to open your eyes and already re-see what is currently there, and I think that's just super important, just to remember that, you know, there's also all these great resources as well. I mean, traditionally, I'm not a trend follower within my studio's work. It's been fascinating to sort of work to a brief in this respect. So just going back to what I said earlier, I think it's just about kind of, you know, interpreting it on your own attitude, really, and just, yeah, playing with colour, making it your own identity. Yeah.
Hiya. So you take inspiration from the world globally to work out the colour trends, but then do you see the trend, is the trend then a truly global trend, or is it relevant just to the UK or just to the Western design world, or is it really like you'll expect to see cherished gold in Korea just as much as you would Mexico and things like that?
It's definitely global, and they pick based on making sure it will resonate with each of our kind of main global territories. So it might be that there's a more popular colour from within, you know, the palettes, or a palette that a particular territory is more drawn to. But no, in the way that they bring all that information together, it has to resonate with all of those global markets.
Is there anybody else who'd like to ask a question?
Any questions?